It's Waxing Lyrical, baby.
Hello, Waxers, and welcome to Waxing Lyrical with Mains and Dutts. I'm your host, Mains, and my colleague planning to open for the first test for England against South Africa is Mr. Neil Dutton. How are we, Neil?
I'm very well, sir. Yourself?
I'm good. We need you to hold up an end. Don't get out. Don't need to score any runs, though.
It's the part I was born to play.
It is the part you were born to play. Distinct lack of aggression, but lack of wickets is also a necessity. Pretty bored of being, 150 for 6, if I'm brutally honest.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase is, the bowler will get bored before you will. And believe me, they will.
They will, Dutton, they will. But enough about cricket, because no one's really interested in it who listens to this podcast anyway. This week, big show. Bit of NFL news. We've then got a test for Dutton and for the rest of the world, I guess. And then Dutton speaks to the brilliant Ross Tucker on all things NFL.
The Podfather.
The Podfather, indeed. The man of many pods and other such nicknames. But first, let's get straight on to it. I thought, let's look. We didn't do NFL last week, so I thought, let's get some news over the past few weeks and get our thoughts on it. And first, big news and big changes in Kansas City. First of all, everybody's favourite walrus, Andy Reid, extension abound. Hopefully, his extension includes only coaching for the first 55 minutes of games. But almost simultaneously, the Big Red got his extension. His GM, John Dorsey, got absolutely canned. So I suppose the two questions is thoughts on Big Red getting the extension and thoughts on sacking a GM who you assume was a major player and you trading up to get a new quarterback.
Well, you can't, with all degree of honesty, you can't argue that Reid doesn't deserve the extension. He went stale in Philadelphia, as we know, the last 2-3 years. He's been fantastic for the Chiefs. They have not had a losing season over the last season and a half. They've won more games than anyone. And obviously it's a problem, time management, but that's management that's going to follow Big Red everywhere he goes. So you can't argue that it's not deserved. They're in a slightly weird situation. They play in a strong division. Everyone else in that division seems to have got better. They look a bit like they don't know whether to stick or twist, to challenge in 2017 or build for 2018 and beyond. It would appear that John Dorsey is a very, very good talent evaluator. He just can't negotiate contracts properly. And I think maybe, if you're spending my money on players and you're leaving it till the last minute and getting basically fleeced, which is pretty much what it looks like has happened with, Eric Berry, who's the other one? Justin Houston. These are people that, the contracts got done at the very last minute and pretty much were very, very high market values. I'm sure these players were always going to re-sign. But I think, the Hunt family are probably just thinking, well, hang on, can you not save a little bit of my money for me, please? And, obviously we said, so what about my extension? No, we think this will probably be your last year. Actually, while we're thinking, get out.
I just find it a bit bizarre that they made a lot of moves, because it's not like they did it at the end of the season. So they've kind of already made all their moves for upcoming season, and then they fired a GM. So they were comfortable enough to allow him to make all those moves, and then thought, actually, we don't need you anymore. I don't know. Are they gonna? Does it look like they're going to hire anyone before the start of the season, started training camp, or is this just going to be left to, head of scouting and Andy Reid gets a bit of extra work during the season?
It does look like they are going to have someone in place before the season. They're interviewing a few people, usually the more successful franchises. So obviously, you're going to try and catch lightning in the bottle that way. I think they're speaking to someone from the Titans. Someone from the Seahawks. There are a few people in-house as well they're going to look at. But ultimately, we don't know where business goes. You've had the draft. So you've done all the preparation. You've done the actual drafting. You've had your mini-camp. You've had OTAs. So maybe this the time that, the Chiefs probably thought, okay, this is time we can set aside to negotiate new deals with our staff who are going into, last year's. And maybe they just thought, we don't know, but it occurs to me that probably they suggested to Mr. Dorsey that we're probably not going to bring you back at the end of this deal. And maybe he was, he took umbrage to this and just said, well, you may as well get rid of me now because it's going to hang over my head. It's going to affect my job. and a knockdown for that, it's going to affect everyone. So to eliminate that uncertainty, he probably, he's fallen on his sword to some extent.
Other news in the AFC West, big news and big money, and that's Derek Carr. He got paid somewhere in the region of $25 million a year. Quarterbacks in Detroit and Washington probably jumping for joy at this point. I assume this is a deal that had to be done, and based on his performance last year, you would expect him to be paid as one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL.
People who say, this is what and someone who's had one decent year, one okay year, one very good year, one decent year, and all of a sudden he's getting this. Yeah, this is what you have to pay, and it's to say otherwise is ignoring the facts of the game. I mean, we were discussing on text that Eagles defense. The 1991 Eagles defence, the gangrene, the Football Outsiders have said is the best defensive unit of the last 30 years. Yeah, it was a wonderful defence. Some exceptional players on it, like Seth Joyner, Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Mike Golick. All those people, yeah, that team didn't do diddly because it didn't have a quarterback. So they're the prime example of if you get one, you pay it. Because ultimately, and as Greg Rosenthal's fond of saying, if Derek Carr hit the open market, how much do the Jets pay him?
Yeah, I think
how much do
I think this is what we need to understand, isn't it? That you look at it and you're like, oh, it's a lot of money. Yeah, it is. Yeah, CEOs get paid a lot of money. Quarterbacks get paid a lot of money. Goal scorers get paid a lot of money. Do you know why? Because they're the hardest positions to fill, and you need them. Yeah. And if you haven't got them, you may as well go home. And okay, Derek hasn't got this long lineage of performance, but he hasn't been in the league very long, and it's needed, and a position now where they don't have to worry about it for the next 5-6 years. You either got one or you haven't. And I look at my team especially, and I'm like, okay, this is a great story. You haven't signed Kirk Cousins. You've now got 19 days to sort this out. If you don't, what's your plan for next season? As he won't be here. The Oakland Raiders / Vegas Raiders, they've got a plan in place now. They have Derek Carr. They will have Amari Cooper. They have a 1-2 punch to deal with. And that's something that the AFC, the West to start with, and the AFC in whole have got to fear now for a long time to come.
I think what Andrew Brandt was saying as well on the Ross Tucker podcast is that it's 125 million, but that's funny money because it's 47 million of it is guaranteed beyond the first 2 years. After that, it's not guaranteed. But if Derek Carr plays up to his contract, are they going to cut him? Of course they're not. So maybe what might have been a better idea was to say, well, tell you what, don't give me 125 in funny money. Give me 85, but guarantee it all. And then we'd start to see a shift, in the market. They'll still get paid an awful lot because, as we said, it's rather an important position. But you'd start seeing, players with you start seeing the players take a bit more leverage back from the owners. Because I say 125, he's not going to see 125 million because the contract will get reworked, and you start adding on to the next one. But someone just needs one player to do it, and one owner to say, yeah, okay, I'll take less money, but I want it all.
Exactly. Moving now more to a vote than get people getting paid something, and that's the NFL's top 100 finished with I suppose, unsurprisingly, Tom Brady being number one. I guess it's a quick one for me, Dutton. And that's would he be your number one?
No, it's bullshit.
Who would be your number one, Dutton? I'm more interested in anything else because I don't really pay attention to it. I just saw that he was number one. I haven't watched any of the shows because I don't really care what NFL players think about their other players. I don't do. It's the same as like PFA Football of the Year. It doesn't really interest me.
No, the best footballer in the NFL, the best football player, position by position, for what he does is Aaron Rodgers. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't watch football. Tom Brady had won the Super Bowl and got the MVP. It's a popularity contest. JJ Watt was 14 or something stupid. He played 3 games last year. These people do not watch the game they play. The NFL's top 100 is, it's very good for stirring debate. And also it's good to see non-footballers with their interviews. A lot of the shows the NFL do, the top tens, they're all good for the people who come on it, the likes of, Ray Didinger and people like that. But the concept of the NFL players voting for a top 100 when they clearly don't watch the game, I don't see the point. You may as well have mine.
I always look and think, like, quarterback is obviously the most important position, but I don't know if that makes you the best football player. But then again, I've never played, so I don't really know. I always think it's someone like, maybe a JJ Watt, although as you said, he only played 3 games. Luke Kuechly, do you know those type of players? I just look and think, is he not better football player than Tom Brady? Do I care? Not really. Does it make a dent in anything? No. Is it another accolade that Tom Brady doesn't care about? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, off to eat your kale and spinach sandwiches.
Exactly. And finally, in the news, Dutton, I just want to acknowledge that you mentioned previously about the 1991 Philadelphia Eagles getting the call as the best defence in the past 30 years by Pro Football Focus. However, I don't want to talk about that because I want to talk about the best team that Pro Football Focus did over the past 30 years, and that is the unheralded...
Can I just stop you? Football Outsiders.
Oh, Football Outsiders, sorry. Football Outsiders, you're right. And that is the 1991 Washington, then very, very professional football team. They were finished 14-2 that year, won their first 11 games. The two losses were by margins of 3-2. One to those Philadelphia Eagles, which was actually the last game of the season. Their playoff run was beat the Falcons 24-7, beat the Lions 41-10 in the conference game. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The Detroit Lions in the conference championship. And beat the Bills 37-24. It should be noted that year they scored the most points, 485, allowed the second fewest, 224, behind the Eagles, and had a turnover ratio of plus 18. That is really the first team I remember fully watching, and boy was it fun.
Let no one ever say that Joe Gibbs isn't one of the best coaches in NFL history. Because if you actually listened, I sent you a link for the He Hate Me episode of Upon Further Review.
Yeah.
The one before that, Vince Quinn was talking about the difference of the NFL when the Redskins won the Super Bowl in, correct me, 82?
Yeah, 82. Yes, yeah,
something like that. The difference between them then and then the difference 2 years later when they played the Miami Dolphins in like the regular season, it was a run-first league. It was everyone ran the ball, hardly anyone passed it. Within the space of about 3 or 4 years, more people were passing it. How many coaches do you know who've come in and been successful doing what they do, have got the skill and the confidence to flip it on the head and basically change the way their team runs? Joe Gibbs did. And he's still the only coach in NFL history to win a Super Bowl with multiple, he's won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. It's never going to happen again.
You look at it, and how I work on the Joe Gibbs thing is that when you talk about the best coaches, the majority of the best coaches, there's always a player linked to them, if you know what I mean. You look at Vince Lombardi, Bart Starr, Tom Landry, Roger Staubach, Belichick and Brady, Bill Walsh and Joe Montana, Bradshaw and Noll. It's Joe Gibbs and me and you. And that's no disservice to the new GM of the Washington semi-professional football team, Doug Williams, Mark Rippon, or Joe Theismann, who was an excellent quarterback, who were all excellent quarterbacks, but they weren't franchise-altering Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And he won with all 3 of them. And to be honest, he won one of those Super Bowls with his kicker as the MVP. Look it up. He towed it as well. It's awesome. He
was front on kicker, and it just goes to show that I don't know how relevant it is now that if you have a system that works like that running game, the counter tray and the hogs up front, you can win. And it's how many years people said, the Broncos, you could put anyone behind that O-line and they'd get 1,500 yards. It was the same with the Redskins. It was you could put anyone at quarterback and they'll produce because the system's that good.
Exactly, Don. Exactly. So that's it for the NFL for the time being. Dutton will come back momentarily with an interview with the brilliant, the Podfather Ross Tucker. Before we do that, I don't know if anyone follows Dutton on social media. Lucky you. You're one of the millions. I follow him on Facebook because we're friends who obviously don't like each other, because that's why you follow people on Facebook. And also on Twitter, I have the honour of following someone who also follows me, who's verified, and that being Neil. And what he put on Facebook this week was on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and I quote, "Can anyone tell me when Glastonbury's on?" One of those classic tweet Facebook sarcasm posts of, I'm sick to death of people talking about this. I don't like it, so let's make fun of it by suggesting that no one's talking about it. It's an old trick. It's much like Dutton's standard Father's Day joke of Happy Father's Day to all them fathers who have sons and all those fathers who have kids and those who don't. Which took
every year.
Took its anniversary to his 5th year on Twitter this year, and boy did I let him know. So we got into a discussion on Glastonbury and a festival. I'm gonna be honest here. I'm not a tent person. I'm not a camping person, and I'm especially not a camping person in the United Kingdom, because you know why? Pisses down. I'm sure I'd be a great camper in California, but I'm not a camper in the United Kingdom, because they go to Malibu and we go to Skegness. It's not the same. But Dutton, explain to us your despair and hatred of a festival, and then we will enlighten people on what we're going to do going forward on the rest of this little segment.
Well, I don't really like live music. Most of the music I listen to, if it was performed in front of a screaming crowd of thousands of people off the face on cider, it wouldn't sound very good. I don't like going more than 12 hours without a shower. And I really, really dislike inadequate toilet facilities.
So what we decided to do was, this was met by consternation in the groups. Some of it was agreed with, but pretty much it made Dutton sound tremendously miserable.
Which I am.
Which he is. So the question that was raised is, how miserable is Dutton? So we thought, as Glastonbury is seen as one of these must-do life experiences, we would test them by finding other life experiences that Dutton doesn't know I've chosen. And I want to see how miserable Dutton is by whether he would want to do these. You will assume that Dutton is now going to slag them all off. I'm hoping I may have found at least one, if not two, that he may actually like, then calling into question how miserable he is.
Yeah, it's not so much a bucket list, more a hit list.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start, Dutton. I think on a bucket list, everybody's got one of them bungee jumping, probably in New Zealand, and your head goes in the water. Would you do it? Are you interested in it?
No, not interested in the slightest. I fall over all the time. I am that clumsy. My latest one is the last few weeks. Occasionally, usually when I'm least expecting, my left knee just gives out and I go tumbling. So I don't need to strap myself around to a big elastic band and see the landscape plummeting at thousands of miles an hour to get my head dumped in water. Besides, as I say, I'm that old and worn out. If I want an adrenaline rush, I just stand up when I don't expect it.
Nice, nice. You've never been to Florida or Disney World?
I have.
Oh, you have? Well, would you go again with your kids?
I'll go with the kids just to show them what a real theme park is like. So then when we come back to this country, they won't want to go to any of the crappy ones we have here.
Okay, that's good. Dutton, how about going and spending a weekend, much like the guys in Hangover, in Las Vegas?
No. Tacky. Overpriced. No interest in gambling. Not good at gambling. Can't deal with hangovers anymore anyway. So I think, the idea of not knowing what time it was because you're stuck in casinos and you don't see the passage of time, I think I'd probably be dead.
Is it, as someone who's never been to Vegas, neither of you, does that blow your mind that literally, I have no idea what time it is. There's no clocks anywhere.
No windows. Yeah.
No windows. That's really a bizarre concept, right?
It's a very clever one. It's a good sociological experiment. I do remember back in the day when it was seen as a sociological experiment, the TV show Big Brother, they had to put clocks in because psychologists said, no, you can't not put clocks in. People will go crackers. Because obviously they could go outside, they could see the passage of time, but not knowing the exact passage of time, they had to put them in. Whereas, Vegas, you don't need to move. They're going to bring you the drinks. They're going to bring you the food. They're going to keep, they're not going to let you sit there and lose all your money on these machines. Of course they're not. They're going to rinse you stupid. No, I'm good.
And if anyone wonders why we stopped doing the betting angle on the Mains and Dutts related NFL shows, Duttons, I hate gambling, I'm crap at it, kind of puts it into perspective. Obviously, fantasy sports and daily fantasy sports.
It's not gambling.
Not gambling.
It's not gambling.
That's skill.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested, Dutton, in major sporting events that are non-NFL related. So
okay.
let's go through lists. Olympic opening ceremony.
No.
World Cup final in football.
No.
Rugby.
No.
First test Boxing Day MCG.
Absolutely.
That's a yes. I knew that one. That's why I put it in. Is there any others? Is there any other sporting events that I haven't mentioned that you would like to go to?
Let me think. See, the problem is most of the major sporting events, it's not about the game. This is why someone said, I bet you'd love to go to the Super Bowl. No, not really. It's too much razzmatazz. The game is of secondary import almost. So I don't know. Last day of the Ryder Cup, maybe.
See,
as long as they weren't only selling Stella.
Yeah, true. Very good point. And the final one that I'm interested in is: would you ever just travel the world? You and possibly Kate and the kids in a backpack. You and Kate in a backpack. You and the kids in a backpack. Is this anything that would ever? Here we go. We start in Laos in Cambodia, and then we go all around there, and then we fly to here, and then we do all that, and then we do Europe.
No, I don't really like people. So the idea of meeting new people, no, it's as I say to people that I just met. I don't say it, but I probably should. I'm really sorry. I'm not taking on any new friends at the moment. I could possibly have a part-time vacancy for a casual acquaintance, but give us your, if you send us your CV in, we'll review it. We'll get back to you. I would like to. There are cities in America I'd like to go back, go to, maybe on my own because Kate probably wouldn't want to come with me. But the idea of travelling, and again, having to entrust myself to places where I don't know the, hygiene arrangements, and I don't really like the people. Maybe I can't eat anything because I'm such a fussy eater, and having to go on so many different planes and boats. No, I'd rather watch my kids fall down the stairs into a vat of acid.
It's an interesting concept, although that is quite an analogy that I'm going to just skip over. Is that in the majority of holidays we've been in, your organisational ability within that, or your responsibilities, so to speak, have been minimal. And when I say minimal, they've usually been give someone money and follow basic instructions of get in a car and get to an airport, which is fair. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. The thought of saying, okay, today, Neil, even if you just did the States, you're going to be in Washington. Then you're going to have to get the Amtrak to New York. Then you go to Boston. Then you go to Philadelphia. Then you'll fly to Los Angeles. I think we should just do that for sport, because I think it could be an hilarious TV show. Although I have absolutely no idea where you'll end up.
If, the BBC or, ITV, they're like throwing good money after bad. If they want to fund this, I will happily do it. I mean, if anyone wants to pay me to, follow the Gridiron Tour, independently, I'll do it. If you get in touch with them, they'll get in touch with me, and I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. Absolutely.
I also like the fact that Dutton, who is a constant talker on social media, realises that they're not friends, and he just used that's a wall that he's got, that he will never meet these people. Excellent stuff, Dutton. It's the physical friends he's not interested in. The Twitter followers he welcomes aboard with open arms.
So you want to get, the bucket list things. I think you're going to say, if you'd mentioned something like the Grand Canyon, it's a fucking hole in the ground. I'm not being funny. The state of the roads in Rangeford, I can go and look in holes in the ground.
Yeah, I'm not. The Grand Canyon's a bit of a for me. I'd like to go skiing. I'd love to travel the world. Probably not with kids. Bungee jumping, sign me up. Absolutely love that kind of concept. That means that because I'm infinitely less miserable than you, although can be seen to be miserable on multiple occasions.
And I mean, I always echo what Jackie Mason said. About one of the greatest tourist attractions in America is Niagara Falls. What's Niagara Falls? It's water. You want to see water coming down from really high? Go outside every time it's raining.
It's a good point up. And boy, as it rains in the UK these last few days, you would have got yourself an eyeful. So
that's good to be alive.
So if you want to test Dutton on how miserable he is, drop him a tweet at @endupton13, and I'm sure he will tell you that he wouldn't like to do any of those activities that you would see as fun. Because
But I'll give you a reason.
He will give you.
I won't
a valid
just dismiss
reason.
it.
No, he will give you a valid reason. That's for sure. On that, Dutton, I think it's time for you to fly solo and have a word with the Podfather, Mr. Ross Tucker, and see what he's up to and see his thoughts on the NFL news stories of the day.
Why not?
Neil Dutton, our boy, the Dutt Bomb.
Joined now on the pod once again by one of our favourites. It's Ross Tucker. You can follow him on Twitter at Ross Tucker NFL. Ross, thank you very much for joining us as always.
Neil, it is always my pleasure. You know that. I know you're a very loyal listener and you're a very loyal retweeter. So I'm happy to come on with you anytime. Thanks.
Oh, it is a pleasure. I do have one small bone to pick with you though, Ross. It's usually my habit. I will download the pods and I'll listen to them on my way to work. And the problem I get then is every time you read out that Omaha Steaks read, I'm hungry for the rest of the day. Because it just sounds absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. That's I feel the same way. Usually I'm doing the read, before lunch or even early in the morning, and it really is delicious. I actually cooked, a bunch of that food last weekend, for my family, which was awesome.
Oh, it does. I mean, I'm obviously if you've ever seen any pictures of me, the highly trained physical athlete I don't resemble, and I'm going into work and thinking about steaks and sausages. It's just not good for me.
Well, enjoy it, man. You only live once.
Oh, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, haven't got you on to talk about meat, although I'm sure we could. There's a couple of things want to get your opinion on. Me and Mainsy and a few other friends, we were talking the other day, just a little debate, who we thought was the best head coach in the NFL who'd never won a Super Bowl, and the one name we seemed to agree on was your former coach, Marty Schottenheimer. Would you agree with that? And how good a coach was he from the time you spent with him?
I would agree with that because his track record of demonstrated success at so many different stops is, I would say, virtually unprecedented. I think Bill Parcells is up there maybe with him as well, but to get, Cleveland to a couple of conference championship games, then to go to Kansas City and have a really good run there of good teams and playoff berths. Then he came to Washington for a year where I was with him, and that went really well. We started out 0-5, and then he went 8-3 in the last 11 games, which was pretty darn impressive. Dan Snyder should have never fired him, Neil. That was one of the biggest mistakes that Daniel Snyder's ever made. He'll make another one if he doesn't get the deal done with Kirk Cousins by the July 17th deadline. And then he went to San Diego. And they were, a couple years there, the best team pretty much in the NFL. They didn't get it done in the playoffs. And that's obviously always going to be, the knock on Marty and what people talk about when they talk about his career is that he never won the big one. But I put so much stock and faith in a guy that did it at so many different places. You know, it's impressive what Bill Walsh did with the 49ers, or, you know, Jimmy Johnson with the Cowboys, or whomever, right? Belichick with the Patriots, certainly. But when you're doing it with not just different quarterbacks and different players, but 4 different organizations, it's an incredibly impressive track record in my mind.
Honestly, what type of coach was he like? I mean, I don't know how much direct contact you would have, you know, in a practice sense, but was he like a man? Was he, you know, this phrase? Was he a player's coach, or was he, you know, very tactical, very quiet? You know, only spoke when he had something to say.
He was the best picker of people that I've ever been around. He could read people, and he knew what was successful in the NFL before it became in vogue in terms of getting guys that were smart and tough. Because I think he realized early on, if you get a bunch of guys that really love football, and obviously there has to be a certain baseline element of athleticism, we all recognize that, but he knew that if you got a bunch of guys that really loved football, that were good people, that you would eventually get through things, even if you had some adversity, and have success. I remember he said one time, you know, it's about the people. It's not about the players. It's about the people that he picked. He felt like he was picking a roster of people rather than a roster of players, which I thought was really interesting. He also had an incredible detailed knowledge of the opponent, as well as pretty much every position on the field. He could coach that, similar to Belichick. He at least had some tidbits for each position. And then, by far, Neil, the best motivator of any NFL coach I played for. I mean, his speeches could get the hair on the back of your neck to stand up and get you to the point where you were fired up and raring to go. I would have run through a wall for that guy. Now, I'm a little biased. He kept me as an undrafted rookie free agent out of Princeton. So, you know, but honestly, even if he cut me, I would still say I think pretty much all of that. It just, being around him longer, I feel even stronger about it.
Another head coach who's been successful hasn't yet, shall we say, won the Super Bowl is Andy Reid. Obviously, he's been successful with the Eagles and now with the Chiefs. The Chiefs seem to be in a slightly weird position at the moment. I mean, I don't think you disagree that he probably does deserve an extension, but they don't look to be the most stable organisation at the moment.
No, I've been talking about that recently on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. I actually talked about it, Neil, before we even, got to the point where John Dorsey was let go, that it just looked to me like they were in an awkward position of serving two masters, so to speak. And I realize that every franchise has to look at not only the present but the future. But when you look at the Chiefs and what they did trading up for Pat Mahomes and then cutting Jeremy Maclin, it was like they wanted to win this year, but I think even they would admit deep down with getting rid of Maclin and not using the draft choices this year on a guy that would make them better this year, that they weren't a great candidate to win the Super Bowl. I mean, they were a long shot in that regard, even though the last couple of years they went to the divisional round and were a very good team. The flip side to that is then, they're looking forward to the future, but they still have all these guys, Tamba Hali, Derek Johnson, that I don't know that those guys will still be really productive players by the time Pat Mahomes might be able to lead the younger guys, Kelsey and Houston and those guys, Tyreek Hill, to the promised land. So I almost feel like they should pick a lane. Are you going for it this year, or are you really gearing up for 2018 and beyond? Instead, they're kind of right in the middle of the road.
You talked on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast with Fran Duffy. You were talking about Jason Peters, one of your former teammates. and about how that basically he was just as he brought in as a tight end, and then they thought, oh, we'll fiddle around here, see what we can do, and then eventually this Hall of Famer emerged. Do you think with the limited amount of practice time coaches have nowadays, it's less likely to stumble almost upon a player like Peters because coaches just don't have the time to look at players like that as projects? It's literally they want as close to the finished product as soon as he gets into camp.
I think it's definitely harder. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I think it's definitely harder than it was previously. When you could really have the practice time to work with guys as well as have enough reps, with contact during the preseason to get to the point where you can decide whether or not the guy shows you enough. Now, that said, as a former player, I'm not in favor of going back to the old practice rules at all. I mean, I think that they should continue to lessen the amount of actual practice time and the amount of physical contact, while at the same time, if they want to increase the amount of walkthroughs and the mental aspect of the game and some of the teaching and learning, I'm all for that. But I don't want anything that is greater wear and tear and does more damage to the body of the players. I just am concerned, Neil, about development of positions in general. It seems like it's becoming harder and harder for undrafted free agents and for low draft picks because you draft these guys, you play them pretty early, usually the high round picks, and it's kind of sink or swim. They either become like a Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Mariota, to use some quarterbacks, or they become like a Johnny Manziel or a Justin Gilbert, not to pick on the Cleveland guys. And it's like, okay, they can't play and they're out of the league in 2 or 3 years. It just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of middle ground.
It does seem that it's this part of the off-season that we have, the organised team activities and mini-camp, that's the only chance that coaches get to actually coach. Whereas once we get into training camp, it's a bit more game plan, it's a bit, getting things in place. Whereas the actual grassroots, as it were, the techniques, they can maybe devote a little bit more time to that earlier in the process.
I felt like I already saw that happening when I was in the league. They want to develop younger guys, but the coaches especially are so focused on their job, their career, and that year that I felt like a lot of times the younger guys, the developmental guys, kind of got a short shrift and the short end of the stick in that regard. I was thankful that the Redskins kept me as the ninth, offensive lineman on the roster and saw enough in me that they really wanted to develop me and they really believed in me. I was really fortunate that was the case because a lot of times it's not the case. And we've seen that over and over again. I've seen teams that, I talked about this on my podcast with a buddy of mine. He was on the practice squad for the Buffalo Bills for 2 years, and they don't even bring him back to training camp the next year. So you just wasted a lot of money and a valuable resource and spot on the roster, albeit the practice squad, and you really came away with it with nothing to show for it. You didn't even bring the guy back to even give him a chance to make the roster after that. Meanwhile, other teams really work the practice squad guys hard because they really want them to develop in their system as guys that can make the roster the next year and continue to progress and develop, especially at positions that really need that development, like the offensive line, like quarterback.
It does seem weird that it's one of these, in terms of how much money the athletes get, which I'm not begrudging them in any way, shape or form, but it's almost that, for 6 months of the year, it's total devotion to this goal, getting better as a team and winning. But then for about 5 months, it's we don't want to see you. We don't want you anywhere near our building. And it just seems a little bit odd that you sometimes wonder why players, once they are left alone, they do go off the rails and, they have these problems. Maybe it's because, literally, they haven't got this year-round structure that I know certainly like Premier League football teams in this country, they probably have a lot more contact with their players during the off-season than the NFL seems to have.
there, Neil, is it became a bargaining chip because the veteran players at the table, they wanted, free time, and they wanted the ability to maybe go back to school or do things on their own and not have to be as committed to the team in the off season. What's crazy about it, though, Neil, is a lot of those guys now instead, they just go ahead and they pay to work out somewhere in Arizona or Florida or wherever. So it's like, I guess they got what they wanted in terms of more free time, but now there's more money coming out of their pocket because they're paying for some elite trainers as opposed to just being at the team's facility and getting fed and trained on the team's dime. So it's actually been more out-of-pocket money for players that go to these, off-season training places. So in that way, first, during the CBA, they didn't place any value on that. They didn't care about that. So they were willing to give in those areas and allow the Players Association to feel like they were getting a victory in that regard, when really the owners didn't really care about how much time they spent there in the off season. They just wanted to show up for the games and get the money.
The last question I've got for you, Ross. Very, very appreciative of your time always. I know how busy you are. Another of your former teammates was in the news last week, Ryan O'Callaghan, who I think you played with at the Patriots. Not just that he came out as being gay, but also the story that came out that he was going to play football for as long as he could, and then he was going to kill himself. I mean, you knew Ryan, you played with him. How surprised were you to hear that he had come out? But also, how much of a shock was the other part of the story to you?
Well, the fact that he played football almost exclusively to hide his sexuality and was able to have that level of success doing so is unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible because, it's just such a tough sport, but it shows you how committed he was to protecting his sexuality. And in terms of, how surprised, I guess I'm always a little surprised because you don't think that when you're in the locker room with him and in the meeting room with him. But I think you also know the percentages and that, there's got to be more homosexual players on every NFL team. You just don't know who they are because a lot of times they don't say anything about it. And so, in a sense, I was surprised, but not that surprised. And more than anything else, I'm incredibly happy for him because I just feel like that would be an unbelievable burden to be carrying around. And I'm glad that he's in a healthy place, that he's out, and that he was able to, get to the point where he felt comfortable to talk publicly about it. And it sounds like he's in a much better place. I'm thrilled for him.
I mean, linking back to another team that we've talked about already, just reading the story, my respect for Scott Pioli, especially, and other people probably at the Kansas City Chiefs for how they helped. My respect for them just went absolutely through the roof. It was really heartwarming to read that part of the story.
Totally agree. Scott Pioli is fantastic, and obviously that showed very well for him.
Well, Ross, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Please tell anyone who's listening where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you listen to this podcast, you can listen to any of my podcasts, Ross Tucker Football Podcast. If you like gambling, even money, if you like fantasy football, Fantasy Feast, if you like evaluating players, the College Draft Podcast, or even if you just like the business of pro football in the United States, the business of sports with Andrew Brandt, all that stuff's available wherever podcasts are found, or of course at rosstucker.com. And you can always follow me on Twitter at RossTuckerNFL or Facebook.com/RossTuckerNFL.
So that was my chat with Ross Tucker. Obviously, as he pointed out earlier, Mainsy not with us for this bit. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week for more nonsense. And I can't remember the silly catchphrase Mains uses to sign us off. So I'll just say thank you and good night.